This lesson is all about classes in JavaScript. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe and demonstrate how class syntax works. So first things first, if you've come to JavaScript from another programming language, you need to recognize that classes in JavaScript are not like classes in other classical-based languages. If JavaScript is your first language, you can ignore that and just sort of keep that in the back of your head. But if you're coming from something like C# or Java, you need to suspend the knowledge that you already know about classes because not all of that stuff applies to the way JavaScript classes work. The class keyword is simply syntactic sugar. What we mean by this is it's an abstraction on top of constructor functions. So it's constructors and prototypes under the hood. It's all constructors and prototypes all the way down. So that's kind of how the class keyword works, is that you already know all about how it works because the class keyword exists. Now, out of the box, kind of by default, JavaScript is not necessarily an object-oriented language. You can use object-oriented paradigms in JavaScript to make it such, but it's kind of more flexible and dynamic than that. And so it's very important to understand that this is not a new object-oriented inheritance model in JavaScript. It's something that already existed that with ES6 we just sort of got some shortcuts for. You've learned already how JS classes work by way of learning constructor functions. And about the prototype object. So you know how they work already. You've had extensive research and playing around with these things already. Classes in JavaScript, remember, are special functions. Okay? We learn that we know that JavaScript provides many different ways of declaring functions, and the class keyword is another way to do that, meaning you have arrow functions, the function keyword, and now you're learning about a new type of function, the class keyword function. Okay, it's weird to call it a function because it's a JavaScript class, but it is essentially a function under the hood. We're going to learn about class declarations. Okay, there's class expressions, just like there are function expressions, and if you're curious, you can head over to the MDN documentation and figure out what those look like and what they're all about. But for now, we're just going to learn about class declarations. So let's dive in and let's see how we set up a class. First and foremost, we declare it like anything else. Notice that there's no equal sign. We're not setting rectangle equal to an object, and we're not using any parentheses for a function. We simply put the class keyword and give it a capital R for convention. Remember, that's convention, not syntax, but we strongly recommend you use the capitalization convention. And then the inner bits of the function gets this constructor method. And notice the weird syntax where we don't have const constructor equals curly or parentheses. Simply we declare constructor parentheses and then open close curly braces. So that is a very familiar syntax that you're going to have to get familiar with when working with classes. And then just like with our constructor functions that we used to build of yesterday, we put the properties that come into our constructor that will be fed into this class on this, right? And this will get returned out of this class when we use the new keyword. So now that we have our rectangle, let's look at what it would look like if we were to declare this as a constructor function without the class keyword. Well, it's not much different. You could potentially pass a height and weight property proper, or pass them on an options object or like an attributes object or whatever. But in this case, we're just simply setting it up this way. Okay. All right. So now we have our awesome class. Let's see how this works when we actually declare and instantiate a class. We're going to just say new rectangle gets or is assigned to a new rectangle. And then in our case with our class set up the way that it's set up, we simply will pass 400 and 800 under 100 as the height and width of this rectangle. So our new rectangle gets new rect gets new rectangle, and we declare it as a function, just passing in those objects. So remember, class is a function, so it's treated specially. Using the new keyword is what kind of differentiates it all. Okay, what we would get out of this if we wanted to console.log new rect is this rectangle object. Okay, you can see that it is an instance of rectangle, and that's important. This, if we were just to console log a function or an object that was generated by just vanilla class or object syntax, then it would just be an object that doesn't really inherit from anything. In this case, rectangle this object is an instance of that rectangle function. So the constructor function is the glue in this class that we set up that binds all of this together. Anything you need as direct properties on your class will be done through the constructor function. So that's a built-in method to classes. It comes out of the box as far as syntax goes. Okay. So let's look at what, so the last thing to note here is that parent.call is never something we have to do ever again. Okay, so we don't have to do that anymore. We're over it. So let's take a look at inheritance with classes. The extends keyword is a keyword that will abstract away the .call and the any of the .binding or .calling, .applying. Okay, so you don't have to do that anymore. It's really nice. The super function will abstract away any of the funky syntax that we have been using to bind our objects prototypes to one another. So remember when we would have to use our class and say class.prototype equals object.create, and then give it this context and then the context of the object that we want to inherit from. No longer do we have to do that anymore to bind up the prototype as well. Okay. This syntax is awesome because it's declarative and obvious which class inherits from which. You're going to really enjoy it. I think you're going to love this syntax based on what you've already been through. And then remember, lastly, classes are just functions. So that's just something I'm going to continue to reiterate. So let's look at how we inherit and extend a class. So let's take an animal class, and these little examples are found right from MDN. So you should be very comfortable going there and kind of looking more into this. But we have animal, and animal takes a name as through its constructor, sets that name on this. Then it also has this speak method. Notice the syntax of speak. Speak is a method on a class, so we use it this way. This is just how you use methods. When we get into React, you're going to be doing this all the time, and we'll kind of show you how it all works with new age class syntax even. So, but yeah, speak is a method on this class, so we declare it by saying speak, parentheses, curly braces, open the function block. Okay, and that's just going to take in the name on this .name and concatenate the make a noise string to it. Okay, so if we wanted to, we could take our animal class and we could extend it to a dog class. So notice the syntax here. Class dog extends animal. This is what I mean by being super declarative. We know that dog will inherit all of animal's properties that come down to it. It's really, really nifty that way. And then it has its own speak function as well, and we could say this .name barks or whatever. So if I was just to declare an animal class, I would just be able to send it a name and it would do its thing. But remember, the super function is what's going to bind these things together. So when we pass in this name, it's going to pass that name back up to the animal class. So super takes care of the binding with .call and any of that prototype stuff that we used to have to do. Okay. So our animal, remember, is going to receive that super, and it's going to be the parent class of our dog. And we could make as many child classes as we want because, of course, there are many, many animals. And dog is a child of animal. Dog extends animal. And if you are extending, the rule of thumb is you have to call super in your constructor function. Otherwise, it won't work. You won't get access to the parent this context. Okay? But now let's dive in and let's see it in some code, and let's figure out how this all works by just declaring, basically using that same example. Okay, go ahead and pull up a code pen. Let's type this stuff out together. You can pause and follow along with me if needed. So I'm just going to, let's zoom in a little bit. I'm just going to declare a class, and we'll call it animal. Just we'll kind of keep with the same syntax that we were just using. Animal's constructor is going to take in a name, and we're going to say this.name equals name. Okay? And then we're going to build a speak method on this class, so all objects that get created from this class will have access to this speak method. Okay? And we're going to look at why that's important in just a minute. And then we're just going to say, simply put, console.log. And then we'll just use template string syntax because it's a lot nicer. This.name in $, curly braces. Interpolate that. Says, for now, we'll just say hello. And so if I wanted to then use this animal, I'm an animal, of course. And then we'll just pass Ryan. And if I wanted to console.log Ryan, I could at this point, and notice that we're going to get this object. But if you look at the actual console, it's going to give us a little bit more hint as to what this animal is, or what this object is. Animal is, or object that we just declared, is an instance of animal. And notice that, remember, if you think back to constructor functions and the way that you've been using them lately, you remember that you've been putting methods and things. You could put them in, on the this context or whatever. Or if you wanted to throw like a speak function onto the object's prototype, you had to do it by way of the prototypal inheritance. You just basically say, you overwrite the prototype by saying, hey, function proto.speak equals the prototype or whatever. But notice out of the box what we get out of our classes. With the class keyword, it automatically is providing us those performance benefits of putting the methods that we bind to this class on the prototype, which is really, really important to understand. So this is an important to understand alert right here. The speak method that we declared inside the class is not going to be a property on the object, but it's going to belong to the object's prototype. I'll say that again. The speak method that we declared inside the class is not going to be a property on the Ryan object, but it's going to be a property, a method on the prototype, okay, of the animal's instantiated object. So that's important to distinguish there. But let's delete this because it's not important any more than what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to learn about the inheritance pattern with classes, and it makes it so much nicer. So now if I want to declare a second class like dog, we're just going to extends animal. Okay? And because I'm extending, all I have to do is make sure that I call super. Okay? So that's very, very important. Call super. So when I declare this constructor, any of the properties that I pass through this constructor that need to be added to the object that gets created from it, they need to be passed in through this constructor as well. So in that case, I'm just going to say name gets passed into this constructor, and then super is going to put that name back up on the parent object. So when we extend this, it's going to say I'm going to use that animal. Okay? And if I wanted to, I could potentially create a dog that says hello from this. So let's take a look at how that works. Const bow wow equals new dog. And then I'm just going to say Grizzly, because that's my dog's name. And then I want to, I just saved it, sorry. And I want to console.log bow wow. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Console.load. There we go. So now I get Grizzly, and then if I look, I ought to have that. No, I ought to not have that speak method directly on the dog prototype. But if I look at the parent constructor, look at the prototype of the animal class, I should have access to it. And it might take us a while to dig, but it's there. So what's going to happen is if I call dog.speak or bowwow.speak, it should reach up the prototype chain and find a speak method. Okay? So that's nice and all if I just wanted to use the default speak method, but that doesn't make sense for a dog. So we're going to create our own speak. method to clean up and organize this dog's specific speak method. So now I'm going to say, I'm going to take that same line we have above, and I'm going to say, not says hello, but instead, rather, I'm going to say barks. Or I could have said it says woof. I'm going to clear that, and we're going to open up the console again. And if we look at the last one that was, look, Grizzly barks instead of says hello, but check out dog. Now on the animal, on the prototype, speak is there, right? So it's not like it has to go up the prototype chain to find that speak method anymore. This speak method belongs to the animal constructor or the animal class, but we don't have to use that one anymore. We could just reach right into our own prototype and find our own speak method right there at our fingertips. And you could do the same thing, and this is where we're going to extend it one step further. Let me just fold some of this code a little bit. We're going to do the same thing with a cat, okay? So I'm going to say class cat extends animal as well. And we have our constructor, of course, because otherwise it wouldn't work. We're not going to send props. We're going to send name. And props could be a giant object of things, and you'll get used to that in React, which is why I typed that. And then we're going to do a speak method that logs out that same thing, but in this case, it's going to say meows. Okay. And so if we instantiate a new cat, we'll say kitty equals new cat. And we'll say Fluffertons. And if we wanted to console.log kitty, okay. All right, let's go check it out. Clear that. I'm going to just turn off my autosave. I need to default that. Okay. Notice that my speak function is right here. Okay. And the name is Flufferton. So if I actually invoke kitty.speak now, yeah, I called it kitty. Clear it, save it, run it. We should see Flufferton's meows and Grizzly barks. So you'll notice that we're going from that crazy syntax and all of the intricacies that we had to deal with our constructor functions, and we changed it to simplify everything that we needed with our class functions. Now, there are plenty of things for you to look at in terms of class functions. So let's go to class MDN, documentation, and I want you to browse through this for just a few minutes and kind of understand the difference between class declarations and class expressions. Okay, we don't use this syntax commonly, so it's not very important. But understand the differences between, the prototype methods. There's getters and setters, so just read up on these things. Statics, all these things come with class that we're not going to dive into because you're going to be able to figure them out along the way. And then, of course, there is a little exercise and training kit for you to follow along with that will extend your knowledge of classes and get you more experience with them. And then we're going to learn next how we actually convert a constructor function into classes. So thanks for tuning in.